councillors are online, both.
Yeah, I'll just check some.
Councillor D. DeVitas, we're just checking you can hear us.
Yes.
Excellent, we can hear you. Thank you.
Councillor Hanley's good.
Councillor Hanley, we see you online as well. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Ec-
Sorry.
Excellent, and we can hear you. Thank you.
I will call this meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. and call on Councillor O'Hara to read the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The city of Thorold is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Haudenosaunee, Hattawin-Daronk, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The city of Thorold stands with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live.
Thank you, Councillor O'Hara. And I just, for everybody that's in the chamber, we have a full council. Councillor DeVitas and Councillor Hanley are joining us by Zoom. So we have a full council, everyone's in attendance. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, can I get a mover and seconder to adopt the agenda? Councillor DeAngela and Councillor O'Hara. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Regarding delegations, given the number of delegations on tonight's agenda, we will allow each delegation to proceed in order on the agenda and hold all questions until every delegation is complete. Council members will then have the opportunity to ask a question of any individual or group who presented on the subject. Councillors, please take note of any questions you have and hold them until this time. For everyone in the chamber or online tonight to speak before council, please note you will have up to 10 minutes to speak and no more. Additionally, I'll ask that you do not repeat any information that has already been provided by the previous delegate. Rather, make use of your time to provide new information. Having said that, the clerk with 1 minute left will give notice to the presenter that there's 1 minute left in their presentation, so they know that they're in their last minute and can wrap up. Okay. Up first, in support of report CAO 12, 2023, I'll call on Shahid Khan and Salvador Providenza, Northland Power. Are they both here, or? Salvatore, you're going to do the presentation? I'm going to do the presentation. Okay, you're up and you have 10 minutes.
Just remind you to select the little button, and if you see the green light, we'll be able to hear your mic.
Just a question about how the slides will be controlled, Mr. Mayor? Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
To begin, Northland would like to thank the City Council for having us here this evening to discuss our project. We're hopeful for your support. Next slide, please. To start, we would like to set out some presentation learning objectives. They include electricity system requirements and the role of natural gas, our Thorold Peaking project, and Northland's renewable natural gas strategy and the value of conventional natural gas displacement. And we implore you today to ask any questions until you are satisfied of this understanding. Next slide, please. So why the Thorold Peaking project? Northland prides itself on its renewables portfolio and its environmental social governance policy and ambitions. But we're also a responsible member of the Ontario energy sector, supporting a reliable, sustainable, and cost-effective electricity system. The decision to initiate the project was not taken lightly, not unlike the decision that you guys face today. And it received corporate approval for 3 reasons. The first being that the call is for capacity, with the expectation that the project will produce little energy and emissions. The second is that the Thorold site makes sense. We have the ability to leverage existing infrastructure, lowering ratepayer costs, and we want to continue to work with and build relationships with the city, community, and rights holders. And third is the prospect of using a low-carbon fuel to displace or lower emissions. Northland would also like to point out that it's answering the call on the storage side of this procurement, with plans to submit multiple projects, and with intentions to participate in any future renewable energy procurements. Next slide, please. What are we talking about? We're talking about Ontario demand, which must be matched second to second. And to do so in a cost-effective, reliable, and sustainable manner, the electricity system requires careful planning and the procurement of a diverse resource mix to meet a suite of operational needs. We'd like to think that power outages happen when it's convenient, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they happen during cold snaps, sometimes they happen during heat waves, and the result is often a loss of life with the lack of energy supplied. Next slide, please. Another way to look at demand is to order it from high to low. And you can see that some resources will be called upon to operate almost 100% of the time, while others will only be required for a handful of hours. There are also resources that will not operate in any given year, because part of planning the electricity system is to meet reserve requirements that are set out by regulations. Next slide, please. When we think about the role of natural gas, it can serve many. There are varying technological configurations, each with its own unique cost and performance characteristics, determining why configuration is selected and what role it will have in the electricity system. Looking at these two technological configurations, you can see that a simple cycle has a lower start time, a higher ramp rate, and its intended utilization is for peaking capacity, 1 to 5%. And this is the capacity that ISO seeks with this procurement. We can give examples. Some would say that this project will double emissions at Thorold. Thorold currently operates at 55% capacity factor. A similar technology to simple cycle is Kirkland Lake Peaker, which operates at less than 1%. Of the total capacity on the system today of natural gas, only 5% of it is simple cycle. This is why the ISO is seeking to procure more of this type of configuration. Next slide, please. The role of natural gas, provincial and federal governments are actually quite aligned on the role of natural gas, as stated in multiple documents. It's for flexibility, reliability, security. It's a backup to complement variable renewables, potentially supplying power during seasonal peaks of demand and in emergencies. Next slide, please. The federal government recognizes this in its clean electricity regulations, providing an exemption such that natural gas can operate this 5% of the time. In spite of that, Northland wants to do more. We just don't want to follow exemptions. We want to minimize emissions, and that's why we've created this renewable natural gas strategy. The focus needs to be on not how much capacity we have on the system, but how that capacity is operated and its use. Next slide, please. Many of you are familiar with the project. It's going to be a peaking plant, 200 megawatts. It's going to use GE, proven technology. We're going to use natural gas, but displaced with renewable natural gas. Next slide, please. The project will be sited adjacent to the existing facility, using the same transmission corridor, minimizing incremental land use. Next slide, please. It carries many benefits, including the continued employment of 20 full-time staff and regular contractors through to 2040. It will also support up to 200 new construction opportunities. It's local generation capable of serving 100,000 homes, as well as stabilizing the provincial and regional grids. And again, please don't undermine the fact that this will be available to the region. Provides RNG stimulus to its industry, potential for local emissions reduction, and continued tax revenue to the city. In terms of engaging activities and opportunities, Northland has gone above and beyond its peers. We've presented to Thorold City Council, the region, 2 community meetings, 1 in person, 1 virtual, an interview with News Talk 610 CKTB. We provided multiple documents on our website, living documents like our Community Indigenous Engagement Plan, a project Q&A that gets updated every time we have a community event so that people understand the questions that were asked and we provide answers to those questions. Next slide, please. The assessments and permits for this project are numerous. Rest assured that the environment is well in hand under the watchful eye of the federal government, the provincial government. Next slide, please. Regional organizations, the city, the sector. Protection of the environment includes air, soil, water, noise. Next slide, please. Before we talk about what is undoubtedly the key point of today, which is emissions, let's first understand how different emissions impact the globe and its inhabitants, where the emissions come from, and what steps can be taken to mitigate their effects. What's the difference between greenhouse gas emissions versus air pollutants? Greenhouse gas emissions are global. What happens on the other side of the world impacts what happens here, versus air pollutants, which are very much local. And these are the concerns I believe that people have today over smog and health. Let's put this in context of the Ontario economy. When we look at greenhouse gases, air pollutants, the electricity sector is very much trace when it comes to these compounds versus, say, transportation. When we say road transportation, this does not include air, sea, or off-road. You can see that the transportation sector is the leading emitter in terms of greenhouse gases and various smog-forming compounds. Maybe we should be focusing our efforts elsewhere. Next slide, please. Let's talk about project emissions. Under expected utilization, it will be between 10,000 and 50,000 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions every year. We have heard concerns raised by the community, rights holders, our internal corporate. The project team developed a renewable natural gas strategy that will prevent incremental carbon from entering the atmosphere. More on this strategy to follow. We'd like to note that without this strategy, charging vehicles directly by the project would result in 44% less emissions than if you continue to operate vehicles by gasoline. As part of the facility's design, when we're thinking about air pollutants, the project will be fitted with a dry low NOx combustion system to limit CO and NOx, air pollutants, to 60% below what the regulatory limit is. Again, going above and beyond to reduce emissions. Next slide, please. Lastly, I'd like to focus on our renewable natural gas strategy. RNG is a carbon neutral fuel that reduces greenhouse gas emissions by capturing otherwise released methane from decaying organic feedstocks and adding utility to its combustion. Why is it carbon neutral? Because carbon is absorbed during feedstock growth and then released into the atmosphere during feedstock decay. This is constant and cyclic. The alternative is, and we agree with everyone's concern about fossil fuels, pulling carbon out of the ground and adding it to the environment. Without and after combustion, it is not returned.
1 minute.
To be carbon neutral, Northland will purchase and inject RNG into Enbridge's distribution network at volumes identical to or greater than any amount of conventional natural gas consumed by the Thorold Peaking project. Northland is working on this right now, working with Tidal Energy, and we'll prioritize RNG purchases from the Thorold and Niagara area. Finally, the premise is that a consumer that injects RNG into a natural gas distribution network need not be the one to combust those exact RNG molecules, nor combust those molecules at the same time they're injected to have the same environmental impact. The important point is to displace natural gas, conventional natural gas from underground and avoid the incremental emissions and costs associated with transporting RNG to a facility for direct combustion. We thank you for the time that you've provided us here today.
Thank you so much, Salvatore, and you'll probably be asked questions later, and if they're addressed to you, then you can come back up to the podium.
I intend to give Shahid all of the hard questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I just caught that. I just seen it. Okay, up next, our next presenter, I'll call on Graham Guest, Niagara Renewable Natural Gas, Walker Industries. And welcome, Graham. And again, 10 minutes, and you'll get a notice when there's 1 minute left.
Thank you very much. So good evening. And thank you for offering us the opportunity to come here and speak to you today. Just wanted to talk a little bit about renewable natural gas and what Walker Industries is currently doing relative to that particular commodity. Just briefly, as many of you know, Walker operates a very large landfill, 2 very large landfills just down the street here. And as part of the natural process of the decay of organic materials under anaerobic conditions inside a landfill, it naturally produces what we call landfill gas. The composition of that gas is about 50% methane, 50% CO2, and some other constituents, as you can see on the screen. Next slide, please. Over the course of the last 10 years, I've been fortunate to be involved with a number of landfill gas to energy projects. Walker spends an enormous amount of time harvesting that landfill gas, making sure that the methane is not emitted to the environment. Methane, as many of you know, is about 25 times more potent than CO2 and gas. And so it's vitally important that we capture and mitigate those emissions to the greatest extent possible. For the last 5 years, I've been working directly on a project that will capture the landfill gas, clean it up, and get it into a format that's suitable for injection into the Enbridge natural gas grid. We capture the methane out of the landfill. We put it through a cleanup process. We strip out all of those non-methane constituents that are in the landfill gas, like CO2, like nitrogen, oxygen. And what we're left with is a product that is molecularly identical to fossil natural gas, but is 100% renewable natural gas. We do not have to frack any more wells. We do not have to harvest it from the earth. It's a naturally occurring product, and it's completely suitable to be consumed in any appliance that would normally consume fossil natural gas, barbecues, home heating appliances, and of course, industrial applications. We have invested over $45 million to construct this facility. It's currently weeks away from injecting its first molecule. The facility is completely constructed now, and we're just going through final commissioning. It'll produce enough energy to heat about 8,700 homes. And this project is in full partnership with Enbridge Natural Gas. They are a stakeholder in the project. And they are committed, as we are, to reducing the methane emissions that are going into our environment to the greatest extent that we can. This particular project will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 48,000 tons, which is the equivalent of taking about 10,000 cars off the road annually. Next slide, please. It's a quick picture of the facility. It's located just off of Thorold Town Line Road. If you were driving down to the residential drop-off, it's located immediately across from the Region's Household Hazardous Waste Disposal Facility. So if you stop there, you can simply turn around and you'll be able to see that facility. This particular facility will have about half the carbon intensity of fossil natural gas once we take into account the energy it takes to produce and clean up the landfill gas. It is connected to the Enbridge network and can be distributed anywhere a pipeline connection is available. And in fact, we are selling a fraction of this gas to a utility in British Columbia, which will give you a sense of how readily this fuel can be dropped into the pipeline and really sold and used anywhere in North America. It is a drop-in fuel. It is a complete replacement for fossil natural gas. There is no molecular difference. There's no energy value difference. And so it's a really nice way to harvest a resource that occurs that we have to do something with. And it's a really nice way to lower the emissions and the carbon intensity of any industry that would choose to take RNG in as a fuel to displace fossil fuels in their operations. Last slide, please. That's a very quick overview of RNG. We're fully supportive of any opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, locally is a great story. This is waste that's produced here in the community. We are dealing with it in a very efficient and environmentally sound manner. And we look forward to the opportunity to partner up with people that are also looking to reduce their carbon emissions and lower their environmental impacts. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Graham. And again, there may be questions at the end. Our third presenter is withdrawn, right?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, they were not able to make it due to some traffic. They did just want to advise they're supportive of the project, and any questions can be directed to Larissa Fenn. That's lfen@hopusports.ca. That was from the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority.
Thank you. Up next, I have a submission from BioVald Canada, and who's representing BioVald here today? David Derleau is representing BioVald Canada, and David, welcome to the podium.
Thank you, Mayor. So my name's David Deleu. I represent the BMI Group and the site of BioVeld Canada here in Thorold. I'm the general manager for the site. The BMI Group is a company which specializes in revitalizing brownfield developments and brownfield industrial sites. We're currently working on the former Resolute Forest Products site, the former Hayes Dana site, and the former Georgia Pacific site. We're very proud of our developments that we've had, and we see this as an extremely important development for the region. We've made some amazing developments here and just provided some great employment opportunities for hundreds of people through this development. We are a neighbor of Northland Power. Northland Power is an excellent neighbor. We recognize them as a solid industrial tenant. We've been neighboring an industrial tenant with them since 2009, and they've got a proven track record as a good corporate citizen. We have a solid working relationship with them on a number of industrial arrangements with the site. This particular project, we see this as a big benefit to our site as far as the electrical infrastructure that will be improved as part of this development. And electrical infrastructure for our site is extremely important for attracting industrial tenants and providing a solid infrastructure and reliability to our industrial tenants. That's about all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Okay, up next, in opposition to report CAO 12-2023, I'll call on Jack Gibbons, Ontario Clean Air Alliance. And Jack, are you here, or is he online?
Jack is online, Mr. Mayor. We're just bringing him in at the moment.
Okay.
Jack, you should now be able to unmute yourself.
There he is.
Hello, can you hear and see me?
Yes, we can, Jack. Welcome. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Ugolini and members of council. I'm Jack Gibbons from the Ontario Clean Air Alliance. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. The Ontario Clean Air Alliance was established in 1997 to promote the phase out of our 5 dirty coal-fired power plants. And now we are working on the next step to clean up our electricity grid, namely to phase out our gas-fired power plants. And I'm very pleased to note that 35 municipalities that represent almost 60% of Ontario's population have passed resolutions calling for the phase out of gas power in Ontario. Now, unfortunately, the government of Ontario is moving in the wrong direction. They're planning to ramp up the pollution from our gas plants by more than 300% by 2030 and by 700% by 2043. In addition, they're planning to procure up to 1,500 megawatts of new gas-fired generation capacity from companies like Northland Power. Now, it doesn't make sense to build new gas plants when the world is on fire and when scientists are telling us that we need to reduce our greenhouse gas pollution by almost 50% by 2030. But the good news is that we have much cleaner and lower cost options to keep our lights on. According to a report from the Royal Bank of Canada, Ontario can completely avoid the need for new gas-fired power plants and reduce our electricity costs by $500 million per year by investing in energy efficiency and demand management. This is a really important finding that can't be repeated too often. According to the Royal Bank of Canada, building new gas plants is not a cost-effective way to meet Ontario's electricity needs. Another good option to avoid the need for new gas plants is to import clean water power from Quebec. Now, in Ontario, our demand for electricity peaks on the hot summer days when our air conditioners are running full out. But in Quebec, the demand for electricity peaks in the winter because most of their homes are heated by electricity. And as a result, Hydro-Quebec has a huge surplus of power available for export to Ontario in the summer months. And I'm pleased to note that last month, the Government of Ontario announced that it is negotiating a 10-year deal to import 600 megawatts of clean electricity from Hydro-Quebec in the summer. And Ontario and Quebec have also announced that they're going to explore opportunities for Ontario to import even more power from Hydro-Quebec in the summer. So this is another cleaner and lower cost option to meet our electricity needs than building a new gas plant. In addition, Ontario needs to invest in made in Ontario renewable energy. Wind and solar are now our lowest cost sources of new electricity supply. And the good news is that Ontario has a huge renewable energy potential. Great Lakes wind power alone could provide us with more than 100% of our electricity needs. By investing in wind and solar energy, we can lower our electricity bills and create good, clean jobs in Niagara region. It's also important to remember that automobile companies and EV battery manufacturers want clean electricity. So by investing in wind and solar energy and by phasing out gas power, we can create a clean electricity grid that will incentivize manufacturing companies to locate in the Niagara region. I would now like to turn to Northland Power's suggestion, the claim that they will offset the pollution from their proposed gas plant by injecting biogas into Enbridge's pipeline system. Now, first, let me note that we agree that reducing the methane emissions from biogas is a good thing to do. But there's a second important fact that Northland didn't mention. And this second unmentioned fact is absolutely crucial for this discussion. It's got to be front and center. And the second fact is simply this. For Canada to meet its climate goals, it must not only reduce the emissions from biogas, but it also must phase out gas power. We must do both. It's not one or the other. We must do both. To achieve our climate targets, we've got to reduce the emissions from biogas, and we've got to reduce the emissions from our gas plants. That is, we must not negate the emissions reductions benefits of reducing biogas emissions by then ramping up the emissions of gas plants. We've got to do both to achieve our climate targets. And now I would like to turn to the good news. According to our Energy Minister, Todd Smith, this Northland's proposed gas plant can only go ahead if it has the approval of Thorold City Council. So you can stop it by simply refusing to give it your seal of approval. So in conclusion, Mr. Mayor and members of council, please help us reduce our greenhouse gas pollution and help us reduce our electricity bills by refusing to give your seal of approval to a high cost and polluting gas plant, new gas plant in the city of Thorold. Thank you for your attention, and I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Jack. So you'll be staying on, and at the end of the presentations, you may be asked questions from council, okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Up
Thank you.
next, Mark Freeman, a resident, and Mark, welcome. And again, 10 minutes, and you'll get a 1 minute notice when you're 1 minute near the end.
Understood. Okay, thank you. Hello, Mr. Mayor and councilors. My name is Mark Freeman, and as the mayor mentioned, I am a resident of Thorold. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak today on this very important subject. My written submission is included in the agenda package, and I'll take the next 10 minutes or so to cover the main points. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about climate change. I think we've all seen the news lately and actually over the past few years. This year we've seen some record-breaking temperatures and climate change-related extreme weather events all around the world. In Canada, we've had a devastating wildfire season that has resulted in close to 200,000 Canadians being evacuated from their homes. Fortunately, most of these people have been able to return to their homes, but that's not the case for everyone. I think it's fairly clear that we must urgently stop burning fossil fuels if we're to have any hope of a livable future for ourselves and for the generations who come after us. It's interesting to note that the Ontario government just released their report on climate change that they commissioned a few years ago. It essentially echoes all the comments on my written submission, including the forecasted damage to property and crops across Ontario, and this includes the Niagara region, if we do not stop our climate change, our greenhouse gases causing climate change. It's great to see that the Niagara Region Strategic Plan is placing a priority on having a green and resilient region with a guiding principle to keeping climate change in mind when making decisions. It's also amazing that, from what I understand, over 200 local residents have sent in written submissions to Thorold City Council to request the opposition to this project. When it comes to this proposed gas plant, I believe that the UN's IPCC special report on global warming sums it up nicely. And I quote, "Every bit of warming matters, every year matters, and every choice matters." Next slide, please. It's unfortunate that the municipalities are getting tangled up in this mess, but this proposed gas plant project is part of the province's ill-conceived plan that, if implemented, would increase the portion of Ontario's dirty electricity generation to over 25% in just a couple of decades. This is going to make it extremely difficult to attract companies to the region who are looking to green their business. The plan would also have the potential to increase greenhouse gases from power generation 7-fold by 2043. This would be taking us in the opposite direction of Canada's objective to build a clean electricity grid by 2035, and the world's objective, including Canada's, to reduce global greenhouse gases by up to 50% by 2030. The plan would also increase the cost of living in Ontario, as generating electricity from renewables is now cheaper than gas. I'm actually quite shocked at the thought of these gas-burning peaker plants that are only used 1 to 5% of the time. I find a very wasteful, expensive, and inefficient solution to Ontario's energy needs. I just imagine how many wind, solar, geothermal, and energy storage projects that could be funded with the billions of dollars that will be wasted if projects like this Thorold gas plant are approved. I suggest we heed the International Energy Agency's advice to energy decision makers all around the world. And again, quote, "The key is to avoid spending on infrastructure that would either lock in heavy emissions for years to come or quickly turn into stranded assets." This advice, sound advice, is pretty much the opposite of Ontario's plan, which would result in either increased emissions or assets that are rarely or ever used. It's going to be one or the other. Next slide, please. Today, Ontario prides itself in having a clean electricity grid, and this is thanks mostly to ending the burning of fossil fuels, specifically coal, about a decade ago. Ontario's current plan of burning fossil gas for electricity will undo years of work, setting us back decades. Fortunately, there is a better way. Ontario can cost-effectively avoid the need for new gas-fired peaker plants by implementing demand response measures, essentially moving the demand for electricity from peak to off-peak hours, which is absolutely the most cost-effective way to reduce peak requirements. We could also be investing in renewable energy and clean energy storage, and encouraging producers of renewable energy to provide electricity to the grid when required. I have some other stuff here on Hydro-Quebec, but Mr. Gibbons have already covered that, so I'm going to skip that. Next slide, please. As for RNG, once in the pipes, as the previous gentlemen have also stated, RNG, which is essentially refined biogas, is the same as fossil gas. It's essentially methane. It's not a clean source of energy. Biogas and fossil gas frequently leak methane and a variety of other pollutants into the air. Leaked methane is a powerful greenhouse gas that warms the atmosphere more than carbon dioxide and can also cause smog. Burning methane results in more climate pollution, specifically CO2, as well as more air pollution. The bottom line is the pollution from leaked and burned methane has been linked to several health issues with increased risks to folks living near extraction facilities and power plants. So we don't really want these in our neighborhood. Other comments to consider, biogas is more expensive than fossil gas. Hence, using biogas will actually increase the cost of electricity generation in Ontario even more. And when it comes to offsets and any net zero type of solutions, one day they'll be able to help us reach our climate goals. However, today's not that day. First, we have to cut our emissions in half by decreasing our use of fossil fuels. Then we can talk about using offsets and credits in order to reach net zero. Next slide, please. I would like to touch upon one other subject before I wrap things up. My understanding is there's a common misperception among Canadians that we are not responsible for climate change and that we can do nothing to resolve climate change. But that's far from the truth. When it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, Canada is in fact one of the most polluting countries in the world. As the fourth largest oil producing country on Earth, it's pretty difficult for Canada not to be responsible for a large chunk of global climate pollution. Therefore, it is extremely important that Canada take steps to mitigate climate change. Unfortunately, we've done very little to reduce emissions compared to other G7 and G20 countries. Relative to 1990, Canada's CO2 emissions have increased by over 20%, while Britain, where it all started over 100 years ago with the Industrial Revolution, they've managed to reduce their emissions by over 40%. Germany, Europe's industrial powerhouse, has reduced their emissions by 35%. So if they can reduce their emissions, we can too. The solutions are available. We just need all levels of government to do their part. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, as per the experts, climate change poses a serious threat to a livable future. It's happening now, and will get a whole lot worse if we don't stop burning fossil fuels, and that includes fossil gas. Canada is a major contributor to the climate crisis, hence we must take responsible action now to stop our runaway emissions. As Canada and the world power more and more buildings and vehicles with electricity, it's imperative that our energy generation be as non-climate polluting as possible. An additional gas plant in Thorold would actually increase local air pollution, adding to the risk of health problems for local residents. RNG offsets does nothing to change that reality. Personally, I want to live in a community that is working towards mitigating climate change by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, not be part of a horrible plan that's going to make the problem worse. Therefore, I'm asking you to please oppose this gas plant proposal. I appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and again, you may be asked questions then.
No problem.
Okay, up next, John Hamilton, resident. John, are you here or is he online? John's here. Go ahead, John.
Good evening, Mayor Ugolini and members of council. My name is John Hamilton. I live in Thorold, and full disclosure, I'm a member and vice president of, or vice chair rather, of the Citizens Advisory Committee on the Environment, Climate Change, and Biodiversity. Just so you know, but I'm speaking on my own behalf. 35 years ago in 1988, so back in the days when I had a full head of dark curly hair, James Hansen, a scientist with NASA, testified before the US Senate, and he told the hearing that global heating linked to the burning of fossil fuels was predicted to lead towards a new climate frontier, unlike anything seen on Earth in a million years. 35 years later, Hansen, quoted in The Guardian this past July, said that the recent record heat waves have heightened a sense of disappointment that we scientists did not communicate more clearly and that we did not elect leaders capable of a more intelligent response. Hansen says, "We are damned fools. We are headed wittingly into the new reality. We knew it was coming, and things will get worse before they get better." Nothing is adapted to this. Matthew Huber, an expert in paleoclimatology at Purdue University, says, "We are pushing temperatures up to Pliocene levels, which is outside the realm of human experience. It's such a massive change that most things on Earth haven't had to deal with it. It's basically an experiment on humans and ecosystems to see how they respond. We have been staring at this as scientists for decades, but now the world is going through the same process, which is like the 5 stages of grief," says Huber. For decades, the fossil fuel industry lied, bribed, and manipulated the facts to keep populations in a state of denial. And many of us were comfortable with that. I mean, after all, what do scientists know? Some of us got angry and signed petitions or voted green. Some of us are bargained. The plane is going to fly to Australia whether I'm on it or not, so I'll call you when I get back. Some of us got depressed. Decades after we knew what was wrong and what was causing it, nothing had really happened to change things, and we were helpless in the face of a disturbing reality. Some of us reached the stage of acceptance. Yes, this is really happening, and unless we act now, we know how it ends. Jobs. In 1967, Suncor, or the Great Canadian Oil Sands Consortium as it then was, began production in the tar sands of Alberta. They stripped the land of the boreal forest so they could mine the bitumen which had lain buried for millions of years. 50-odd years later, you can inhale the smoke from the burning of what remains of that forest in the privacy of your own home. Jobs, they said, jobs, and tens of thousands flocked to Alberta over the decades to get jobs, and everyone got fat and happy and drove vehicles named for the landscapes they despoil: tundra, Yukon, Sierra, and the all-purpose terrain. But, said Greenpeace and David Suzuki, what about the environment? Leave it in the ground. Oh, we can't do that, said governments. People will lose their jobs, and if that happens, I may lose mine, so no deal. And gas was cheap, at least until Justin Trudeau came along with his lefty pinko carbon tax. What, how, and when the climate crisis will affect us is down to the luck of the draw. Maybe, like Nova Scotia or Greece, Thorold will be hit with wildfires and flooding within weeks of one another. Maybe the impact will be skyrocketing prices for food when whole swathes of agricultural land turn to dust and rivers dry up, as is happening in California. Maybe those more numerous, stronger hurricanes in the Atlantic will track inland, it's happened before, and devastate the Niagara Peninsula, leaving thousands of climate refugees in their wake. Or maybe the spotted lanternfly will travel up from Pennsylvania and wipe out Niagara's grape crop and the accompanying tourism industry. We don't know. But what we do know is that we will not be unaffected. I have a dog in this fight. I don't have children or grandchildren, but I have nieces, and I have nephews, and I have godchildren, and I have friends who do. And so it matters to me a whole lot that they have some prospect of a future. Northland has a dog in this fight. If they can get this project approved, they and their shareholders will be guaranteed to make a pile of money. And we will pay and continue to pay through the nose for however many generations are left to us. But jobs, they will say, until their plant becomes a stranded asset and we have to bail them out. As you consider your vote to approve or disapprove this expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure in Thorold in 2023, I would ask you to remember something else that Matthew Huber, the paleoclimatologist, said. We can't simply give up because the situation is dire. We need to say, here is where we need to invest and change and innovate and not give up. We can't simply write off billions of people. And I would ask you to ask yourselves two questions. If not me, who? And if not now, when? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. Okay, up next, I'll call on Don Morley, resident. Don, welcome to the podium.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I'm here to, how should I say, plead with you to see beyond the grandiosity of what this expansion program with Northland would submit. I have serious concerns that they have not even lived up to their previous commitment prior to that was submitted to this council prior to 2010. As a lifelong resident of Thorold, particularly Thorold South being a neighbor to the plant, I can't begin to express the concern I have for the particulates that are currently falling, that are heavier than air, that you can not only see but feel. Not just during the day, but more so at night, where the sight of the brown plumes that we're seeing from miles away is much greater for, I fear, that same reason, so it can't be seen. I think it's no coincidence that they've beautified their facility to the extent of repainting their stack within the past month to encourage the outcome from this debate into their favor. I don't believe that everything is what it seems when it comes to Northland. The pollution that's being pumped out now will only be greater, not less, as they plan it's going to be this and it's going to be that when they still haven't lived up to their previous commitment to the brown smoke that we all see living in the town of Thorold. It's even more so living in Thorold South when these heavier than air particulates are descending from the prevailing winds that are predominantly out of the west, as we all know. There are many victims out there. Victims, I shouldn't say, but citizens that deserve better. And I ask you, and I implore you to please see beyond the grandiosities of how things could be and consider how things are. That's short and sweet. It was difficult for me, but I fear I had no choice but to step up and voice a concern that affects all of us. Probably more so for those that live downwind. Thank you all.
Thank
very
you,
much.
Don, and thank you for coming to council. Please. And thank you for coming to council, and you may be asked questions after as well. Jordan Bekos, and I hope I pronounced that right, and please correct me if I didn't, Jordan.
Don't worry about it. I went to the Netherlands for 2 years. It turns out I can't pronounce it correctly either. So anyways, good enough. So thank you, Mayor, members of council, for the opportunity to speak here. I hope my title, this should be brief, but I talk too much, speaks for itself. I'm very supportive of Northland on certain things in their renewable energy capacity. I know them from the industry. RNG, I'm quite supportive of that as well. But I'm here to say and ask you to decide that Ontario and this region deserves better than new natural gas plants for our energy supplies. Next slide, please. So just a brief introduction. I've actually written to many of you councillors before supporting actually a lot of projects. I am a professional engineer. I've been working in the energy sector since 2006, specifically building hydro, wind, solar projects here in the Niagara region. I have a master's degree in sustainable energy technology, and I was hopeful that I could add some useful context to your decision. So if you saw in the package, my apologies for its length. I tried to address a few questions that I would have if I was sitting in your position, specifically those listed there that we'll jump into here on the next slide, please. So starting with, do we need simple cycle gas turbines? As Northland has said, IESO has requested this, and I don't deny that, but I will say that in this industry, the IESO has never been a source for change. The IESO is a source of the status quo, reliable electricity. They have a very specific mandate, and it's not to worry about emissions or about any of those other concerns that are affecting us, but don't fall into that category for them. So I'd like you to just look at, very simply, that graph from the IESO's website showing how much natural gas we currently have. That is 28, I don't want to exaggerate, 28% of our current installed capacity is gas. That 11 gigawatts is approximately equivalent to half of our peak. We get about 22 to 25 gigawatts of peak here, and at night, middle of the night, we could probably power the whole province with gas. That's what we currently have before building what you're being asked to build today. So the grid's stable. So what's changing? Why are we gonna need this in a few years' time? 2027, they're coming online. Is it population? Well, I can tell you the population has been increasing for 20 years and the energy consumption has been decreasing for 20 years. So that's not the driver. Electrification absolutely is a driver of why we're going to need more energy. We have to double the size of this sector, but it's not the driver for peaks. We're talking about electrifying electric cars, which are batteries on wheels. I've been driving electric since 2011. You charge it whenever you want. And if they put in any incentive, I'm charging on the low overnight rate right now, which is 2 cents in the middle of the night, rather than on the higher rates. Those things are easy to do. Same thing with heating. Heat is something easy to store, easy to maneuver. Our existing electric loads are much more complicated, so it's not a peak driver. Renewable energy, it's complicated, but essentially it's small, it's distributed. It's not like losing a nuclear plant or a large centralized generator that needs that massive fast ramp. And industry, I hope this isn't overlapping, my apologies, but just to be clear, the industry we're attracting to Ontario right now are battery manufacturers for EVs. They're electric motor manufacturers for EVs. They're hydrogen plants for the renewable energy transition. Why would we consider powering them with natural gas and saying, by the way, we see that you're on the cutting edge and you're moving forward and you're attracted by our clean energy, but we're just going to use this old stuff to power you now? I don't understand how that's a selling point. So what is this actually for? The Pickering nuclear plant is shutting down. There's a baseload concern, and we've been telling the industry that for years, that we need to actually be ramping up our renewable energy production. And for a reason you can all guess and understand, that hasn't been happening for about the last decade. We've been sitting on our hands while the rest of the country and the world moves. But this isn't a baseload plant. That's what nuclear is, it's baseload. This is a peaker. So why do we need a peaker to replace baseload? That's the actual transition we're doing here. Well, the reason is, this peaker enables the rest of our natural gas. Those combined cycle plants are running more and more and more all the time. They're running as baseload. So this is just going to enable them to run further. In my next section, we'll see how that affects. If we could just go to the next slide here. I'll skip this slide entirely. I'm just trying to make the point that the IESO is not really one that drives forward change. They never have been. They go through ministry directives. And that's where people like you have that responsibility. So RNG, is that the solution? I strongly support RNG. I wrote to you about the Char Technologies project and said that I strongly support it because from the right sources, biomass is a great resource. But what I'll say is, we don't have that much to play with. It's never going to replace natural gas. It's going to replace a small portion of it. You see we've got 4,400 petajoules of gas usage in Canada. We currently have 10 of RNG. If we bump it up to everything they think we can put together on, it's 155. Do we really think that this electricity plant is going to be the best use of that very limited resource? The fact of the matter is, this is a simple cycle plant. We get 40% of the energy we put into it out of it. We get 60% on a combined cycle, and if we actually go to combined heat and power, like many countries around the world, we're getting 80%. Why do we think that a simple cycle solution will be our long-term use of RNG? So the next point is very simple. If the RNG argument convinces you, please just make sure it's actually required, not just an optional thing. But really what I want to stress here is that this project, because it takes that peaking load, enables emissions. It's not about the direct emissions from this project. It's about the emissions that are able to be produced by the existing gas fleet as it gets to run more base load and leave the peaking capability to this plant. Next slide, please. So investment, I know this is a big part of this for you, so I really want to stress that you're talking about jobs, and I understand that. But I just said to you earlier, we need to double the size of the electricity sector in the next decade and a bit. Do you really think that anyone who is skilled and talented in the energy sector will be looking for work if we actually pursue the renewable energy, the battery storage, the EVs, the stuff we need to do? We are not lacking jobs, we are lacking people to do that work. And I see that when we talk about this, we're talking about $200 million in investment in the community. Every time I put an energy project in, it's been about how much is this going to cost consumers? I haven't seen anyone talk about the cost per kilowatt hour. I haven't seen anyone talk about the cost of alternatives. How else could we do this and what will that cost? Those are the arguments I would want to say that this should move forward. But I don't even know if we have a supply gap here in Niagara region. I'm pretty sure we have a pretty big plant and we're putting in a hydrogen plant because we got a lot of energy we don't know what to do with in this particular region. So I do want to note one thing there. I, again, apologize if it's overlap. The additional cost to ratepayers, if this turbine is shut down prematurely, I'll stress, look at the minister's directive. It specifically says in there that if they are not able to comply with the federal regulations for carbon emissions, they have to make best efforts, admittedly, they are going to be covered for the life of their contract. They will be paid out. That's stated directly in the minister's directive. So anyways, next slide, please. Sorry, I'm a little nervous with public speaking, but I just wanted to bring this up here and say, while I don't support a lot of things that come out of our current energy direction, I will say that they rely very heavily on saying Ontario has an incredibly clean and reliable electricity sector. That's attracting business. That's attracting all of the things that we want to see in terms of growth in Niagara or in Ontario. But that change you see there, that 2005 to 2015, that 10-year change where we took 20% of our coal and we wiped it out from the electricity sector, I'm very proud that I started working in 2006 and I was able to be a small part of that, right alongside Northland Power. And they were a huge driver of it as well. But I see promoting these sorts of projects and moving this direction and not pushing harder and saying you can do better as undermining the work that so many people, whether it's engineers, whether it's universities that did research, whether it's politicians who push those limits to get us to where we are today, and now we say is such a great value, this undermines the work that we've done. And I hope that I'm speaking for more than myself, but that's all I can speak for today. And to me, I don't want to see this gas plant go ahead. I hope you guys won't allow it to.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Jordan. Okay, now that all the delegations are complete, are there any questions from members of council to any of the delegations who spoke this evening? And I'll open the floor for questions. Go ahead, Councillor Sentence.
Yeah, if Jordan can come back up. Sorry.
I didn't like speaking.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Jordan. Can you explain, I don't quite, wind and solar, I understand. The battery storage systems that I see online, I saw on Northland's website as well. Can you explain how they work to me?
That's a very big, broad question. If you're talking about how they work in the system,
Just layman's terms, I would like.
They do not produce energy. Let's start there.
Okay.
They need energy from somewhere to store that energy and use it at a later time. So they're shifting energy from times when we have it in surplus to times where we have a deficit. That's really their role. They have specific attributes. That means they usually run. To be cost effective, it's a shorter duration. A shorter duration is more cost effective. So a 2-hour plant versus a 4-hour plant versus an 8-hour plant, you usually don't get to 8-hour plants because it gets very expensive. That's where the role of the existing natural gas is going to be incredibly valuable in the transition period, because you're going to see the batteries can do the ramp, but if you need, let's say you had a very low wind or solar period for a prolonged period, then we will rely on the gas until we've built out all of our, I gotta stop hitting this thing, until we've built out all the rest of the equipment we need. It is certainly doable, but I'm not suggesting that, you know, moving entirely away from fossil fuels is gonna be easy. And I'm also not here promoting, by the way, that we turn off all our natural gas tomorrow. I'm promoting we don't invest in new, and I'm promoting that we recognize that we do have to push today, not in the future, if we're ever gonna get this accomplished. Because the IESO is right. The benefits of electrifying transportation, of electrifying heating, all those things are going to outweigh the last bit of fossil fuels we have on the electricity sector. That's not a reason to expand it. Sorry, I got off track.
No, that's okay. So, but charging them up and having them waiting to put onto the grid is a clean system to have anywhere.
Yeah, there is always going to be materials and emissions from production of things and things like that. That's where the idea of a circular economy is very important. Batteries need to be recycled.
Right.
Batteries need to be made to have as long a life as possible, things like that. But yes, the power that they are putting out is basically power they have previously taken on. The reason that's going to be clean is that that's where you're going to have the surpluses. You're not going to turn on a fossil fuel plant just to charge a battery. You're going to use when there's excess wind and solar and everything else. And the IESO is promoting and is purchasing a large amount of battery storage.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Any further questions, Councillor Sutton?
Just of Graham, if I could ask Graham a question.
Let's go ahead. Graham?
Certainly.
Yeah, hi Graham. When you were up, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the presenter, you were up earlier and you were talking about the gas and renewable gas. This gas that you're going to be producing at Walker's and putting into the system, this can be used by anybody. Like, people will be using this up. So you'll be removing the methane from Walker's like you plan on doing, but it will be used by anybody that wants to buy this
Yes,
gas.
once it's in the provincial grid, it can be consumed by almost anyone in North America, quite honestly.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor DeAngelo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I could call Jordan back up, gonna test his public speaking tonight.
Go ahead, Jordan.
Just so that we're open and transparent here, I do have solar panels on my house in 2012, so it's been 11 years. They work great. My question to you is, I know there's a lot of money that's going to be invested into these gas plants or projected to be invested. Are we missing other opportunities in solar and wind power that won't have the funds to do the same thing in terms of replacing some of the power that's needed? I'm asking you because you seem quite knowledgeable in the industry and have worked through it. Is there projects we're not taking advantage of?
I would not put it as one bucket of funds that shifts here or there. I would look at the cost effectiveness of the grid generally and trying to get that lowest cost. And I would say that this doesn't contribute to that in my view, but I haven't done a rigorous analysis of it. What I would say is that we're not taking advantage of renewable energy, period, right now. If you look, you can put solar panels out net metered currently, but the last procurement of any size for wind energy or solar of any size was actually 2010. We had the feed-in tariff that came in 2010. There was about 3,000 megawatts of renewable energy procured, or sorry, that might have just been wind. But in feed-in tariff 2, 3, 4, 5, they were 100 megawatts here, 100 megawatts there. I think if I look through all of the contracts that actually got built from that, there was one 0.5 megawatt wind turbine. So, you know, the one in Toronto, about the size of that one, built 20 years ago. One of those got built after that 2010 contract. No, excuse me. The ones that were contracted in 2010 were built out over the next number of years, but we haven't procured anything new. And to be perfectly honest, it is a complicated process because we got to 95% clean electricity by doing that. And we sort of got there where the dog that's caught the car and didn't know what to do with ourselves. And so we backed off, and then we went even further back for reasons you can guess. But essentially, we haven't been procuring any new renewable energy. And right now, the only thing we've heard is that by 2025, there should be a new procurement that involves new renewable energy. And I really hope that's not the case. I hope that we push forward sooner. I hope that we push forward with a lot of scale, and I hope it gives Northland Power and us a lot of opportunities to create more wind and solar and everything else, and to get rid of the emissions outside of the electricity sector, because we have to consider energy as a whole now, not just electricity here, gas here, and all these things separately. We're going after the whole pocket of emitting sources. So.
Okay, well, I think that answers my question, because I know here in Thorold, we had an opportunity to put a hydro peaking plant in back when I sat on hydro back 96 to 99. It's part of the waterway that goes to the DQ, then goes to the Chicluna. There's an opportunity to do some at the headwater. But
Lake Gibson.
Yeah, Lake Gibson. We just don't seem to take advantage of that, and I think sometimes resources aren't allocated for those smaller projects that I think could be beneficial and add more reliability to the grid so that we don't have catastrophic incidences. Like, those are the type of projects, like, I'm sure there's more in Ontario. Are there any other ones that you're aware of that might be suitable to push forward with that?
For that, so hydro is site-specific. Wind and solar can often go in a wide variety of places. But I think I can maybe better answer your first question. One of the reasons that people don't quite understand why those projects don't move forward is that there's a tendency to try and balance things versus a market price in the electricity sector. And the electricity sector market price for the last number of years was about $0.01 a kilowatt hour. And if you ask anyone who operates hydro, you could more cheaply fill in a hydro station with concrete than continue to operate at market price. You need a power purchase agreement. You need a price that makes sense. And that's why there hasn't been anything available. That project can't go ahead until it's going to get a price that's not reliant directly on the market. And that's not a thing about renewable energy, that's about anybody on the market. This project that you're considering now isn't going on a spot market price by any stretch. It's going through a new process, competitive procurement, and going into I honestly, I'll admit, I don't fully understand how it's going to get paid. And that's something that is interesting, because every renewable energy contract out there is posted on the internet with its prices. So.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That answers my question.
Okay. I got Councillor Decker, and then I got Councillor DeBeek.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If Mark Freeman can come up, I just have a couple questions about his presentation.
Sure.
Hi, Mark. You mentioned in your presentation an increase in cost of the electricity. What percentage of the cost would that increase be?
Oh, from using gas versus using renewables?
Yeah.
I do not believe I have that even in my detailed submission, the exact the amount.
Okay, and then you also mentioned an increase in air pollution and health problems. I mean, obviously, we can see in our air today the effects it has on people that have respiratory issues and stuff. What other health problems have you what other health problems do you know of?
Right, so let me get to my notes here. So there's a number of health issues associated with leaked and burned methane, such as premature death, or like preterm birth or birth defects, okay?
Yep.
There's cancers, there's heart and other cardiovascular disease, there's nervous disorders, severe respiratory like asthma, what you mentioned.
Yep.
Diminished mental health, as well as increased premature death. So for example, increased premature death, there's roughly about 15,000 Canadians that die every year from air pollution. So I'm not saying that's all from gas, I'm saying from air pollution in general, okay?
Yep.
So that'll be a subcomponent of that.
No, that's great to know. Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate your presentation, was great.
Thank you.
I just have a question perhaps for Salvatore.
Salvatore, please.
Hello.
Salvatore, thank you for your presentation. Obviously, we have a lot of concerned residents regarding this renewable gas plant going in our area of Thorold South. How can we guarantee them that they're going to be safe around this new plant that you're proposing to us this evening?
Sure. First, maybe I'll start off, probably made a mistake when I first presented. I was a bit nervous. I didn't properly introduce myself to everybody. It seems like that's an important factor here by the nature of how people are asking questions to certain presenters. So I went to school for mechanical engineering, University of Toronto. I also hold a master's in business administration from the Ron School of Management. I joined Northland back in March. Prior to joining Northland, I worked for the IESO for 13 years. I worked in power system planning, I worked in contract management. I wrote the sections on cost and emissions and the pathways to decarbonization study. So I just wanted to put that all out there for people. If they are looking to subject matter expertise, I'm available to answer questions. With respect to the project in question, guaranteeing that our residents who are concerned about emissions, like I said, there are many federal, provincial, regional, city standards. There's permits, there's assessments, there are regulations on emissions. I mentioned within the presentation about NOx and carbon monoxide. Those are two of the bad ones, I would say, for air pollutants and what they cause. The people who've spoken here, they're not wrong in terms they can cause respiratory illness. They're irritants, eyes and skin. In terms of guaranteeing that emissions will, from those types of emissions, we do have standards. So part of this plant will require a continuous emissions monitoring system. It literally forms part of the stack where emissions are vented. And we have to monitor our particulates real time. And we have to meet the standards that are put forth in real time by the various government jurisdictions. And so with respect to NOx and SOx, like I mentioned in the report, it will be roughly 9 parts per million. And that's well below the regulatory requirement of 25 parts per million. People have they've said they're concerned about the yellow plume that the current facility emits. With this new peaking facility, instead of that plume from the existing facility can last anywhere from 80 minutes to 4 hours. It's a combined cycle facility. The nature there is because there are 2 cycles there together, it takes a long time for it to heat up. It's a metallurgy thing. With a simple cycle instead, that time is cut down to roughly between 10 to 15 minutes, regardless of whether or not the facility is warm already or is completely cold. So in terms of emissions versus today, it'll be a lot less than the current facility. And like I said, there's regulations in place. I advise people if they're concerned with emissions, maybe we're better off speaking with the government to tighten up those regulations, not just with respect to power production, but others as well. Within my presentation, I stated if we look at the Ontario economy as a whole, the real emissions come from the transportation sector. So if people here are concerned about the air quality in Thorold, I would implore them to shift away from gasoline or diesel engines and go to EV, electric vehicles, ride your bike. If we're talking about reducing emissions, that is the first way to reduce in substantial amounts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I got Councillor Didavides. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for Jack Gibsons.
Yeah.
Mr. Gibson, I was wondering, why does the government wait so long? Why aren't we more aggressive with getting power from Quebec Hydro? And why do we waste so much money on gas power plants when we have Quebec right beside us?
Jack, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very good question. And Ontario's had a policy of electricity separatism for many, many years. And it's because it suits the interests of our large power companies. Our large power companies like OPG or Bruce Power or Northland Power, they don't want competition from Quebec. Quebec has a huge supply of low-cost water power, and they don't want to face competition. And so the electric power industry in Ontario, the Ontario power producers, have lobbied the government for years not to buy clean, low-cost power from Quebec. And that protects their profits, but it's not good for Ontario's consumers who end up paying more for electricity, and it's not good for our environment. Now, we first moved away from this policy of electricity separatism when Premier Wynne was Premier. She signed a couple of deals for water power from Quebec. They were good deals. They gave us clean power and they gave us a lower price. The only problem with Premier Wynne's deals was they're quite small. We should have been buying a lot more power from Quebec. And then, in the last 12 months, Doug Ford announced that he was going to allow Premier Wynne's deal with Quebec to expire. And that just didn't make any economic sense or any environmental sense. And there was a large outcry against that. And thankfully, that public outcry persuaded Premier Ford to reconsider. And just last month, on August the 30th, he announced that Ontario is now in the process of negotiating a 10-year deal with Quebec to import 600 megawatts of water power from Quebec. And they also went on to say that they're going to explore the opportunity to buy even more power from Quebec, and they're going to explore the opportunity to increase the transmission links with Quebec so we can buy even more power. So that's an important breakthrough. Very pleased that Premier Ford has now recognized that water power from Quebec is a good option for Ontario. And so hopefully we can persuade him to buy even more power from Quebec. And if you turn down this Northland proposal tonight, that will hopefully encourage Premier Ford to look to cleaner and lower cost options to keep our lights on.
Thank you.
Councillor, do you have any further questions?
No, I don't. Thank you very much.
Okay, I got Councillor O'Hare.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I'd like to call Mr. Providenza back to the microphone. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. Mr. Providenza, I ran on a strong environmental platform. I oppose the increased greenhouse gas emissions that Northland Power will be adding to our environment. That's something that is directly opposite to what not only the UN but our federal government is aiming for in a decarbonizing of the grid. But here at home, I'm strongly opposed to the toxic pollutants that will be released from the burning of natural gas, RNGs or not. And I understand that Northland's dry low nitrous oxide combustion system will reduce some of these, but it will only reduce them. It will not eliminate them. We have to be clear about that. And what's going to happen is that toxic chemicals will be let into the atmosphere and will be particularly affecting residents, especially those in Thorold South. I was on the Ontario government webpage.
You're here to ask questions.
Here it comes.
So get to the question.
Mr. Mayor.
Then you can talk on the when the report hits.
So I've taken this information right off the Environmental Registry of Ontario, which you have to report to. Which of the following toxins will not be released through burning natural gas at Northland? Nitrous oxides, volatile organic compounds, promethium, cobalt, sulfur dioxides, formaldehyde, ethane, butane, and hexane.
They would probably vary between minimal or trace amounts, but I would agree that combustion of any fuel, fossil fuel, or renewable natural gas could result in emissions. But at the same time, I would say let's not overlook the fastest path to reducing emissions. As I said, if we all decided to move from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles and charged those electric vehicles with the Thorold peaking plant, we'd be reducing emissions by 44%.
Yes, but at present, what I'm trying to point out is that the burning of natural gas will be resulting in these toxic chemicals being released. Is that true?
Trace amounts, that's correct.
Thank you.
But you could also say that in the development of any project, whether it's a renewable natural gas project, wind, solar, there is emissions, life cycle emissions associated with all. And I would consider that as well in any decision made here tonight.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor?
My last question, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Provenet. Sorry, one last question. Of course, we have been told that this is a peaker plant that will only burn for a very small portion of the time. What guarantees can we receive that tell us that you will not be burning natural gas at a much higher rate than anticipated, say 20% or 40% of the year? Do we have anything in place to stop that?
It's ultimately determined by demand growth, resources available on the system. But like I said, these are peaking plants. They'll be the last resources that come on to support the system. This procurement includes storage. Those resources will be utilized first. The reason why that isn't 100% storage in this procurement, the full 4,000 megawatts, is because the ISO acknowledges that this is a new resource to the province to participate in our market, and there's a risk tolerance associated with that. And like the coal transition, which was successful, and it took over a decade to do, it wrapped up in 2014, there was a 10-year transition where we had both natural gas and coal operating at the same time to ensure the reliability of the system. And I think Jordan's made this point already, is that this transition requires both resources as well. We need them both at the same time to ensure reliable transition. The question has come up, why are we building these new gas plants when we have existing ones? Is that we built too much of the wrong technology. Is this the fault of the ISO and the Ontario government? Some would say yes or no. But it reflected the outlook at the time. And we were a lot bullish on our economy at that point back then. We've put up slides that say, referencing 2010 and 2015, that say there's 150 terawatt hours, 160 terawatt hours of demand. We're not at that point anymore. The system currently is 130 terawatt hours. That's how much we produce right now. So we make plans, and the nature of plans is that they're always going to be wrong, right? And need to course correct. And that includes the course correction to a sustainable electricity system, which is what I believe the ISO is trying to do. I worked for the ISO for 13 years. I joined Northland because I wanted to be on the other side of that, and I believed in this company. I wanted to be part of the transition, and I believe this project is the best thing for the province right now. When we talk about RNG and offsets, and that there's a time and a place, the time and the place will be when it's paired with these technologies, right? We have 500 megawatts of peaking gas on the system right now. We want to push that to approximately 2,000 with this procurement, and we need to wean off of the combined cycle natural gas, right? We will need support from these resources because the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. There'll be times when battery storage will be completely discharged, and what do we do then, right? We need to be strategic about this transition, which will include redundancy. Means we'll have resources on the system purposely built that do not operate. They're there for insurance. That's the reason why we purchase insurance. And it's not Ontario going rogue on this at this time. There are regulations in place that say, hey, we have to cover a certain percentage of our peak demand, right? These regulations are based on statistics. There's an expected value. The expected value is an average. That means there's going to be years where we rely more on certain resources, and there's going to be years where we don't use them at all.
Thank you. Is there any further questions, Councillor?
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that has questions? Seeing none, I want to thank all the delegations tonight that came out to speak, and thank you for all of you for your presentations. Now, we have correspondence. Is there a mover and a seconder for the two correspondence items being the written submissions from the members of the public? That's CLC 19-2023 and CLC 2023. I have a mover, Councillor Sentence, and a seconder, Councillor DeRose. Is there any discussion on the correspondence? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item for consideration. CAO 12-2023, Northland Power Council request for a letter of endorsement. That is up on the screen now. Do you want to take that, Manoj, or are you going to?
Mr. Mayor, the recommendations are that the report CEO 12-2023, dated September 19th, 2023, respecting Northland Power Council request for a letter of endorsement be received, and that Thorold City Council endorse Northland Power's proposal as requested, and that staff be directed to provide a letter of endorsement as part of the IESO application process on behalf of the City of Thorold, signed by the clerk and mayor. Thank you.
Before I put the report on the floor for discussion, can I get a mover and a seconder? And then we'll put the report on. I got Councillor Sentence again and Councillor DeRoe. Okay, the report's on the floor. It's open for discussion. Who wants to speak? Go ahead, Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you mind if I stand?
No, go
I'd
ahead.
like to be respectful to our presenters.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank all our presenters tonight, both for and against. I'd like to commend the very cordial conversation we had and the questions from council. That being said, I was going to write something today, but things got in the way. So I'm just going to go off the cuff here. I'm looking at this, and it looks to me like there's two camps here. And I don't want to oversimplify it, and I don't want to get into conversations with engineers because that's scary. But it looks like we have a financial decision here to make from the proponents, and a decision that's more along the environmental and health of the province, and more specifically of the people from Thorold. And that's a side that I side with. And again, we had a lot of very, very great presentations, but I just want to go to one specific one because it touched me the most, and it was Mr. Morley. Mr. Morley's a resident of Thorold South, and he talks about living there. He talks about the emissions, the years of putting up with it, and the fear going forward. And what I'm hearing is there will be more emissions, although these emissions from the new system will be reduced. But it's still more emissions. And it's not what the people in Thorold South or the people in Thorold or the people in the Niagara region deserve. So again, I don't want to go on and on because there'll be a lot of discussion here, I think, but I just want to make my points clear on why I will not support this. And again, I'd like to thank everybody who was for and against for your great debate tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Longo. And Councillor Sentence.
Well, now I'm going to stand.
Yeah.
Got me, Councillor Longo. The same sentiments. Thank you for all your presentations. Thank you for everybody coming in. I looked at this, and I if I ramble on, I'm sorry, but I don't mean to be disrespectful to anybody, but when I looked at Northlands, and I understand you have a job to represent them, but we have a job to represent the people who elected us and the citizens of Thorold, and especially Thorold South. I lived there. We had a vanilla smell. We had mill smells. We had many smells. So we were elected to represent those. I know you have a very clean plant. You have a very well-run plant. And it's there. I don't believe it's going anywhere with if we need energy demands. But I think what we need to do when it comes to BioVeld and HOPA, they think big. They did something at that plant that I could never have imagined. They think big. So I think we should think big together. And I think you have the land there. You have this idea to put the other peaker plant there. Let's look at putting solar there. Let's look at putting battery storage there. Again, I don't completely understand it. Let's work together, because when I look on Northland's website, every project that's on there right now is solar, wind, or battery. There is no gas component to it. So let's be partners in this. Let's go and say, okay, we have the area, and I can tell you, it's sun all day if the clouds aren't out. It's every day, every field, you could do acres of solar power there, and again, battery, and have it, and you're already tied into the grid. So think big with these guys. I know the Veldmans, they think big and think outside the box. Let's think big with them. And again, I represent the people of the city of Thorold, and I got a soft spot for Thorold South, and I understand what they're talking about. And even if this is, the emissions coming out are a little piece of the puzzle that is adding on to the climate problem that I believe we have. I personally believe we have, and we're going down a bad path. If it's just this little piece, why add it on? Why not do something that we can all do together and solve the problem? Everybody, we're all part of the solution and not part of the problem. So that's the reason I won't be supporting this. I think we can do better, and I hope we do.
Thank you, Councillor Sentence. I had Councillor Hanley on with his hand up. Councillor Hanley, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, you know what? I work in the electrical industry myself, and we just had our biannual meeting yesterday, and the one proponent that was near the end there is it's absolutely correct. We need to double our electricity output. I'm working at a facility that we're doing 100% rebuild. We actually will be installing one of the biggest transformers in Ontario in 2024. Again, I try to look at all the proponents, you know, and I honestly am not a believer in all the climate change initiatives, you know, and I look at how much Canada, you know, we put into emissions. It's 545.6 million metric tons a year. But then I look at our boreal forest, and that each, you know, between 31 and 45 trees offset it by 1 ton. We're actually carbon neutral in Canada. We're responsible for 1.8% of the carbon that goes into the atmosphere, but we actually take more carbon out because of our forestry industries. People talk about turbines. Turbine blades right now are not 100% recyclable. They actually are just getting into the market of recycling turbine blades. There's a plant now, basically one of the only ones that do it's in Denmark. So, you know, going to wind power isn't the all go-to option either, even though there hasn't been none that's come online since 2010. Let's go to electric batteries. There's not one facility in Canada that actually recycles car batteries at this time. There's companies that recycle lithium batteries, but not car batteries. There's only one plant, I think, that's probably even near recycling car batteries right now, and that's in Rochester, New York. So, and we got to look at it takes 500,000 metric tons of land or materials just to build one electric battery. So it's not all greener on the other side of the fence. They actually, you remember, we need all that heavy equipment to do all that mining, all the emissions from it. They actually put more in than they take out. And with this no fossil fuels, you know, and to reach the projected goal, I'm going to tell you it's unrealistic. You know, look at what the clothes you're wearing today, your polyester, your nylon, your laptop, that coffee maker you use in the morning. Do you know that 80% of the parts in an electric car are made from fossil fuels because they contain plastics? Either are made from fossil fuel or are a derivative of fossil fuels. So to think that we're going to eliminate fossil fuels, You'll be wearing loincloths. We won't even be wearing clothes no more because 99% of the stuff that we manufacture has oil byproducts in it. Our plastic glasses, our plastic straws, you know, just to name a few, even glass does. Wildfire and floods, that's not new to me. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to be for the project because there's negatives and there's positives. Ontario Power Generation isn't even at full capacity. I know that. I worked in a tunnel in Niagara Falls, that new tunnel that they built, 45 feet in diameter. We estimate it's running at about 40% capacity. We don't need to even get electricity in from Quebec from water. We have the capability to do it now, but the government won't ramp it up. That's the truth. That's what's happening here now. And heat pumps, what they say, you know, heat pumps aren't what they're made out to be. Canada has a diverse climate. From, you know, warmer weathers to colder weathers. So to get off of thinking that you're going to get rid of all natural gas and everybody's going to go to heat pumps and heat their house isn't realistic in Canada. It's not going to happen. So that's some of the points I want to make. But overall, I have to look out for the citizens of Thorold and their concerns. As the other councils that speak previous to me with the pollutants, whatever, even though personally I support Canadian gas and oil, but I can't support this project in Thorold at this time. That's the only comments I have to make, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hanley. Councillor Divididi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank all the presenters tonight. And, we got to stop burning fossil fuels. If not now, I don't know when. Our generation was plopped on our lap, and our generation is the only generation to fix this. If we don't get it right now, the next generation doesn't have a chance. And all the people in Thorold, so many people phone me and emails and everything else. They don't want it, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to live beside that. So I'm totally opposed to this tonight.
Thank you, Councillor. I got Councillor Decker and then Councillor DeRose.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize for not standing like my fellow councilmen, and I do echo their sentiments. And I know what it's like to have respiratory issues, and especially this year, we've had so much issues with our air quality from our fires and whatnot. And you know, I appreciate everyone's presentations, and even though, you know, they've said that the, you know, emissions from the gases would be small, I still do have the fear that it could get worse. And, you know, my priority is with all the residents in Thorold South and in surrounding areas, that we have to try to keep our air clean. So I cannot support this at this time, and my sentiments are with keeping, you know, is about the health and safety of everyone around the area. So thanks once again to everyone that presented this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Decker. Go ahead, Councillor DeRose.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and stating your opinions. I have kind of torn and agreeing and disagreeing with both sides, but as my councillors before me have stated, we were elected to do what's best for the residents of Thorold. I concur a lot with what Councillor Hanley said. We have similar beliefs in certain things, but I can't support this. Mr. Morley, I've got some good friends in Thorold South. I got some letters in the last few days from former soccer teammates that I grew up with, and Thorold South's always gotten a short end of the stick, and it's got to stop. So I will not support this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DeRose. I got Councillor D'Angelo. Did you want to speak? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks that we're getting back to our tradition of standing. It's good for the leagues. Again, I'd also like to thank the presenters. They did a great job explaining stuff, bringing knowledge to council. Not just the presenters. We received a lot of information through email, pros and cons of it, but it's all information that we took in, and it was very valuable. I won't be supporting it. Again, I'm going to stand by my fellow residents and my councillors. It's not the appropriate time to be doing this. I think we need to send a message, a clear one, since we have the power to do this, of rejecting this proposal to the provincial and federal government, that they have to start working more cooperatively with multi-plans and multi-approaches, such as what Councillor Sentence brought up, I think there's avenues and ways of getting over this hurdle of this power we need, but I think we have to think forward thinking, not backwards thinking, and that's where we were headed with the gas and continuation of that. So I think this is a good message for us to send, and I think there's still an opportunity moving forward if the government listens to or moves forward with the Hydro-Quebec options. We do need reliable power, but we also have to move forward with it. So on that note, like I said, I won't be supporting the
Thank you. Councillor O'Hare.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I think just about everything has been said tonight, and I really have heard some great voices from Thorold. I really appreciate you coming out to express your views and sharing them with us. Very passionate, very knowledgeable. And I'll echo Councillor Longo. Don, your presentation was very touching, very heartfelt. I really applaud you for taking the time, having the nerve to stand up and share your thoughts on this peaker plant. I also want to say I agree with Councillor Sentence that if Northland Power could look at alternative options for electricity in the future, please come knocking on our door, and it would be wonderful to work with you. And to all my councillors, fellow councillors, I've heard some amazing things tonight, and I'm really proud. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're done. Before I call the vote, I just want to echo the thoughts of this council. This process, the IESO application process, threw this in our laps, and this process tonight shows how democracy works, and everybody on both sides was very cordial. I can't thank everybody enough for the way this whole process played out here tonight, and the way everybody in the council chambers handled themselves. So thank you very much. Before I call the vote, did you want to add one thing?
I just want to ask for a recorded vote, Mr. Mayor, so we can send a clear message.
Absolutely.
Of
Thank you.
unity here.
Recorded vote has been called by Councillor Longo. We had a mover and a seconder, and let's be clear here. So you want to put up the resolution. So if you agree with the letter of recommendation, you vote yes. If you don't agree with the letter of recommendation, you vote no. Correct to the clerk? Okay.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I'll call the vote.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to council, according to how we've done this by practice before, we'll start with the mover and seconder of the motion and then go alphabetically. So I'll start Councillor Sentence.
No.
Councillor DeRose.
No.
Councillor D'Angela.
I'm going to vote no, but I just want to bring a point up. It's not in our procedural bylaw on how we vote on recorded votes. Traditionally, it's been the mover or seconder, and then it goes clockwise, not alphabetical, because alphabetical always puts the pressure on the first person at the top of the list. So unless it's an aside, so we need to get that resolved, because it's come up a couple times and it just sort of falls off the table.
So we'll deal with that. That's a point well taken.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
Councillor DeVitas.
No.
Councillor Decker.
No.
Councillor Handley.
No.
Councillor Longo.
No.
Councillor O'Hare.
No.
Mr. Mayor.
No.
The motion is lost.
And it's unanimous.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to bring up a point. It's great that we're moving forward and planting the trees, and I know it's denoted in the map. I don't know if you could show the map up there. It's part of the report. I'll speak while, yeah. Yeah, we're signifying to plant the trees in section Y and section X, which is the most northerly part of the cemetery. What I propose, because I saw a list of the trees, there is some trees that have some size to them. There's a few of them, they call them 5-gallon ones, but Mr. Holman was able to let me know that they're about 4 to 6 feet high, those ones. There's a lot of them that are smaller, but there is a gap along the roadway that sort of faces east of the mausoleum. And I'm just wondering if we could plant some of the larger trees there to rectify that gap. Yeah, right where the Y is in cemetery on the map. There's a huge gap there. You see road, you see the trucks, and you actually see the plant that was shown in the previous presentation where they mentioned that they're right across from the Regions Waste Depot. That's just south of the Y. So I'm just hoping, as part of this plan, if staff can look at seeing if that's suitable to put some of the trees along that to make sort of just a line of trees right around the road. And if there's any other ones that go along Town Line Road, if there's gaps there to put the bigger trees there so we could fill those gaps, but the majority of the trees would end up in the Y and X. So that was just my sort of amendment to
Can
it,
you,
if that's possible.
do you want to speak to that, Jeff? Is that doable? And
Yeah, I think, Mr. Mayor, I think we could achieve that.
okay,
That
point well
satisfies
taken.
me.
Go ahead, Councillor DeRose.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to ask if there are any leftover trees, can we offer them to residents to be planted on their own properties? If the work that day doesn't get all done and there's some extra trees, is it possible? Because I've had residents bring that forward.
I don't know if there will be, but again, I'll ask Jeff to answer that question.
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, if there are any surplus trees, I think the whole objective here is to get the trees planted and in the ground. I know that there was an initiative raised by council earlier to have a tree giveaway, and so we're mindful of that as well.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of different options there, but I think for the most part, we'll try to get these 400 in the ground.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Councillor DeAngelo.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's an excellent idea with the tree giveaway. It may not happen this year, but maybe through the discussion of what's going on with these trees, if staff could maybe sort of do a bit of a follow-up on that, and come at budget time next year, maybe there's a possibility that we can work something out to actually have a planned tree giveaway at that point in time to put some effort into it. Right now, I think it's a bit rushed to get this all done.
Right.
But I think as you're conversing with the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority and the tree supplier, that could be something that could be worked on.
I think it's something that's in the works already regarding with the initiative that was brought forward to council regarding around Earth Day. Am I right, Joe? Yeah, I see you in the audience, and I know you presented to council. Yeah. Yeah, so we will work on that, and we'll bring, obviously, something will come back to council. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, through you to Mr. Holman. The area indicated with the X and Y on the map, are they future burial grounds? Will they be developed in years to come as burial plots?
Through Mr. Mayor, I suppose the potential is there for that to occur.
Okay, I guess my concern is if we plant a number of trees in the XY area and future generations need it for burial plots, are we now going to have to cut down mature trees? And that's why I thought the perimeter may be best. And again, I don't want to slow down the planting of trees, but I just want to make sure we don't plant trees and have people 100 years from now say, why did those guys and girls plant those trees there? So I just hope that there's some thought given to the placement of some of these trees when the volunteers are there.
That point's duly noted. Okay, thank you, Councillor. I got Councillor Hanley and then Councillor DeRose. Go ahead, Councillor Hanley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I like the placement of the trees where they're going. I think, I mentioned that last time, we should be making more or less a little nursery that we can use for future tree plantings. I understand the concerns of Councillor Longo too, but I'm thinking the intentions is to move these trees. I'm not gonna get into it, Mr. Mayor, but I just wanna say the way this came about, that there's, I'll personally, I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna reach out to Councillor O'Hare, because I believe that some procedures were broken, some policies were broken, and being a rookie and that stuff, and going about in the way he did, because, you know, I had been in process or in possession of some other ideas, whatever, and how this came about. But I'm very appreciated that it's coming to being, coming to fruition. We do need the greenery, no doubt about it. I know how much he appreciates the canopy, and I can remember talking to him when he walked down Rose Avenue, McDonald Avenues, and how beautiful they look, and how can we get other streets to look as such in our park. So I support the initiative. It's just, I didn't like the fact to be blindsided at the last meeting and not be a councillor that was talked about or even approached about it, knowing that other councillors had. So in the future, I'm hoping that that can change.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dedivides.
Oh, through you, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to say thank you for Councillor O'Hara for getting all these trees. I know he did it from the goodness of his heart. I know if something went wrong, it was unintentional, but I think we all got a little bit on him at the last meeting, and I just want to say he's doing a great job, and I want to say thank you for getting all these trees.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Decker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank Jeff and his team for getting this back to council this quick, within a week, and I'm glad that it's getting done. Free trees, volunteers, couldn't ask for anything more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Decker. Councillor DeRose, sorry, I was supposed to go to you.
Yeah, it's all right, Mr. Mayor, through you. Just also to Jeff, can we make sure, I know there's distances that certain roots of certain trees grow. So I guess in collaboration with the MPCA, we might want to make sure, just so that they don't infringe on any future burial sites like Councillor Longo said, or present burial sites. Because I know I've put trees in and I found out after that they grow 60, 70 feet roots, and I had to move them from my septic area. So just if they can make you aware of the distance of the roots.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much. We should probably acknowledge the NPCA representatives that are in attendance online tonight. Leilani Lee Yates and Natalie Green are available to answer any questions you might have. But part of the community event will be an education process, and they will have staff available to provide in-kind information about the planting of trees and spacing of trees so that they're sustainable. Point well made, Councillor, and we'll make sure that that information gets conveyed at the community event.
Thank you so much, and thank you for raising that, and thank you to the NPCA and the representatives here and online this evening. Is that everything? Go ahead, Councillor O'Hare.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to all the councillors, I just want to extend an invitation to all councillors to come and get involved when we do the tree planting with the community groups. That I believe is going to be October 28th. Is that correct, Mr. Holman? So hopefully we'll see some councillors out for that event.
I'll have the clerk duly note that and make sure that Tessa gets that out again to all of council.
Great,
okay?
thank you.
Yes, go ahead,
Just
Councillor.
clarity on the date, the report says the 27th and the 28th? So, one's
Jeff?
September, one's October.
27th of September.
Okay.
27.
The September 27th and October 28th, it says there's 2 days?
The September 20, oh, excuse me, through you, Mr. Mayor, the September 27th date is when the Niagara College environmental students will be coming out to plant 400 trees. That's the first phase. Or not to plant 400 trees, to plant perhaps half to 2/3 of those trees. Whatever is remaining will be planted on a community day on October 28th, and that's the one I'm inviting. Of course, come out on the 27th as well, but we're hoping to have some community groups out on October 28th.
Thank you. Is that it? Okay, we had a mover and a seconder for that. Did I get that? Yep. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Bylaws. Can I get a mover and a seconder for Bill 152, 2023? Counselor DeRose and Counselor Decker. A bylaw to adopt, ratify, and confirm the actions of City Council at its meeting held September 19th, 2023. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. There be no further business. This meeting is hereby adjourned at 8:24 p.m. And I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and I want to thank everybody for the way you conducted